Well, welcome everybody. I want to congratulate you on making it into the final hour of MIX09. And just thank you for not heading off for your flights and coming to see this session instead. I hope you're going to enjoy it and think it's a worthwhile investment, because we've got some great content for you in the next 20 minutes. So when I think about building applications, I think that there's some similarities between building an application and really building of any kind, building on a construction site, say. In that when you want to build an application or when you want to build a building, it sure is helpful if someone's put up some scaffolding for you first so that you can gain access to the site that you're going to be working on, and that it's actually structured for you so that entry points are straightforward and obvious. And then it's really great to have some hand tools in place so that when you get inside those rooms and you start putting in the second fit and finish, fitting the windows, making sure everything's the way it should be, and customizing the paint job, that you've got everything that's in hand for you to do that. What I want to say is that in Visual Studio 2010, the WPF and Silverlight developer have scaffolding and they have hand tools. And I hope you'll see what I mean by that by the time we get to the end. Just want to say feedback is really encouraged. You have my email address right there on the slide, and you'll see in a moment that we also have a live Twitter feed going on this. So VS Designer, SLWPF, go ahead and tweet if you're feeling that way inclined. Love to hear your feedback on anything I say today or anything to do with the designer on those channels. So what I'm going to do for you in the next sort of 15 minutes or so is just run through what it takes to build a master details form in both WPF and Silverlight using the new tools. And really this is kind of the last but one slide you're going to see, so I hope you enjoy. To start us off, this is the Visual Studio 2010 Designer, and you'll see that it's got a slightly different look and feel from the looks that you might have seen before. It's not what I'm going to be talking about today, but I'm sure you'll have noticed it, so I'll just mention it there. What I'm going to start by doing is taking a quick look at the data sources window. Now, the data sources window is something that will be really familiar to you if you were in my earlier session as part of Kevin Jerstat's talk, and I'd like to refer you back to that talk for a much fuller coverage of this topic, because this is a short session and I'm going to focus on some other stuff here. But in a nutshell, if you weren't in that session, what the data sources window does for you, you remember I talked about the scaffolding side of the story? That's what it does. Basically, in this case, I've set the data sources window up to point at a database on my machine, and it's created for me a strongly typed data set, this XSD guy here, that's essentially a proxy that points to that database. Now, the good news that brings is that it means that we can automatically bind up data from that data source and create some UI really very quickly. So imagine that my job here was to create a little real estate application, and I had some listings and I wanted to see the viewings for each of those listings. You can see that I have my data tables right here. I've actually pre-selected a few fields. It's created the mappings for me. I'm going to choose details, and I'm going to go right ahead and drop onto my form. Now, what's happening under the hood here is that we're interrogating that database, or that schema actually, that's in the XSD, and we're creating for you a set of basic form UI based on that, the schema that you chose. You'd see that it's chosen labels that are based on the field names, and that the text boxes here are actually bound up. And if we take a quick look down here in the code, you'll see that the data binding here is already set up for you. It's done a whole bunch more than that, in fact. It's bound up the ambient collection view source, which basically is giving all the data to this application, and put all of the relevant namespace declarations in without you actually having to write a single line of code. And that's really good news because it provides you with an entry point from which you can start to customize. Now, clearly, this application, as it looks right now, is really not the kind of thing you want to ship, but it's got a great deal of stuff in there that stops you from having to write that stuff for yourself, right? So all of that scaffolding that you need to get started. And that could be working off an object layer, it could be working off a database as I have it here, or it could be working off a web service. So that's all good news. It gets you started quickly, it gets you into the building, gets you productive. That's really what this is all about. I'm going to skip right over now into the first public outing of the Silverlight Designer for Visual Studio 2010, which is an interactive designer, as you'll see. So what I'm actually going to do here is a little bit different. I'm actually at very much the same kind of stage I would have been with that data sources window in the prior stage. So what I've actually got here is some viewings data, which I've created in a local sample data form so that I don't have to go ahead and create a database. This could equally be something that connects you to real data. I have a type called viewings, which I'm actually going to connect to, and I'm going to do that right here in the new designer. So I'm going to take hold of our grid here, and you can see that it's immediately providing us exactly the same kind of interactions that you've been familiar with in the Visual Studio 2008 designer for WPF, right here for Silverlight. There are a few new things here. I can switch my column types here, should I want to, and we may come back to that in a moment. But drag-drop creation works just the same. And in fact, everything that I'm going to show you here from here on in will work just the same in the WPF designer as well. So just in case you're wondering, it's kind of the obvious question. So I've created a list box here. It's not really the size that I want it to be. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to search for its margins, and I'm going to flush those by resetting the value. That just makes it dock out to my, my cell here in the grid. So I have a list box, and that's great. But the first thing I really want to do to make a list box meaningful is I actually want to bind it up to some data. Now, to do that, we actually now have some UI. So what we really want to do here is set the item source for that list box, and we use the new apply data binding wizard, which is actually a builder, which allows us to reach out and see any available sources that we might be able to find. Okay? So in this case, you'll remember that I declared right here in my user controls resources, I've got this viewings object. So we can just pick that right up without having to really understand the relevant syntax. It goes ahead and makes all the necessary arrangements for us and binds it up. Okay? So you can see actually that's picked up already. It's actually not terribly interesting right now because my data template isn't actually synced up to anything useful. So all we're seeing is the type. If you're wondering what the text is up there, there it is. It's this viewing type. So kind of, yeah, we've got the data in there and it happens to have like 6 entries in it, but at the moment there's really not much to see. So we really need to fix that up. Let's get rid of the toolbox for the moment. And to do that and save a little bit of time, given that this is a short session, I'm going to just use a pre-canned item template here. So we can go ahead and select our list box. There it is in the code. Make a little space. And paste in our item template. You see right away it started to realize that our item template is in place. So if we zoom out a little bit, you can see kind of the overview there. And it's just a very simple item template. It's got a couple of checkboxes and a few other pieces that I've actually pre-bound up. Some of them are bound up already, but I want to show you what the experience is like for binding up a new one. So we have a text block here, and my intention here is to bind up this text block and show the name of the person who was actually doing the viewing. Okay? So to do that, we select our text block right here in the XAML, and we notice that the text block is synchronized in the properties inspector. And what we really want to do now is to set up that text property and have it do what we want. So we can once again use our handy dandy apply data binding picker. You notice that it's picking up the context that we've already set, so I didn't need to go up there and take a look at that, but it tells you what it is right here. And in this case, my type is a complex type. It's got a number of sub-properties. So I'm going to just reach right in there and say, okay, I know I've got viewings, and those consist of a viewer type which has an object here that allows me to pick off the first name, which is just a string. So I can bind that quite happily to a text block, and everything's looking great. And sure enough, when I let go, there it is. There's my binding created without me having to understand any of that binding syntax. It's just been hooked up for me. No real problem there. Now, if I've actually been honing my XAML skills, there's a good chance that I might want to actually do this by hand because, you know, once you've got into the rhythm of it, you can do these things faster sometimes in text. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And the good news is that we now have markup extension IntelliSense, which means that when you're in here, you're not on your own, and you'll get a little help. The help does stop right here. it doesn't actually look up the keys for you or the types in your objects. It's not like the picker in that respect. But it is still pretty useful, and it will get you going pretty quick. And in this case, I can pretty much work out that last name's what I'm going to want here. So I should now find that I have, when I run, a decent starting point. There we go. So we've got our data template up here, and we've actually can see that we've got our items showing up. At the moment, we're using these two checks to indicate whether the buyer is mortgage approved and whether they're planning to proceed on the particular purchase that we're looking at. That's kind of okay, but we could do with improving this UI a little bit. We need to get our hand tools out to do that. Okay? So what we're actually going to do is we're going to tweak that template just a little bit more. The first thing I'm going to do is, you can see that in our border here, we have a border brush that is black. But wouldn't it be nice if we could kind of light that thing up, okay, and say that we want a little traffic light on that border. We want to say that, okay, it's green if they're proceeding, and it's red if they're not. So actually, that's pretty easy to achieve using the picker. What we do, we hit our apply data binding, and we say, okay, are they proceeding? Now, obviously, proceeding isn't a brush, so we're going to need a converter here to help us get from brush, Boolean, which is what is coming up from the data source, into a brush. So we fire up our converters pane here. We click on the set of converters that I've already included in my project, and we choose this Boolean to brush converter, okay, which is going to fulfill the task that we need. Those of you who've used converters before will know that typically you end up using them over and over and over again. And so what we allow you to do right here is to create a new resource, which you can create at any place in your tree. So whether that's in in fact, in Silverlight 3, you'll be able to put that into a merged resource dictionary. Right now, it's app.xaml or page.xaml, because this is all on Silverlight 2. So we're going to just leave it with the default name there. It's not a bad name, but you might want to use your own convention. And when we go back down now, we should now find that our border has acquired a nice binding. And you can see that that's a reasonably complex little binding there. We didn't have to write any of that for ourselves. All good news, I hope you'll agree. We're going to follow along with that theme. And here where we have a checkbox for is mortgage approved, I'm just going to comment that guy out and do a little bit more customization. I'm going to set the width here. And then I'm going to go ahead and set up the fill using the same method that I just used. So in this case, it is mortgage approved. Now the good news here is that if we reach in and select, we see that it already has that reference resource that we created earlier. So we don't need to create a new one. It already has one for this particular case. So we can just go ahead and use it. And you can see right away, it started to appear up here in our view. Oh, I've made a mistake somewhere. Not to worry. Pay no attention to that. This is very toasty warm bits that you're looking at here, so they'll be in a whole lot better state if by the time we ship. I'm just going to cycle that for a moment. Unfortunately, it's lost my changes there. But what you would have seen had I finished that is that when I run that, I'll see that nice traffic light coming up, and everything looks great. So for the next step, and in the final minute or two, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the master details part. So for my second part of my grid, I'm just going to drop in below the list box here a little area that's already bound up with some details for each of the items. And once again, I've just used another template, but I want to show you a couple of really useful and interesting features here that will help you to do this kind of scenario. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use the selected item on that list box as the thing that drives our detail selection, and we'll wire that up in a moment. But the first thing we want to do here is we also want to set up our data binding picker so that it actually knows about the type that we're going to bind to, because here in Silverlight, and especially in Silverlight 2, because of the lack of element-to-element binding, what you find is you often need to set some stuff up in code. And in order for the designer, in other words, that data binding picker, to see what you're doing in that code, you need to give it a little hint. And that's what the thing we're about to do is. So what we're going to say is, we're going to say d:\data context. Okay? What that's saying is, your data context is at design time going to come from a particular place. This actually is the basis of the infrastructure that allows you to flip back and forth between a design time infrastructure and a real runtime one where you might be collecting to a real database. And what we're going to say is, okay, we're going to need a design instance, and we need to hint at what the type is. As in this case, our type is a little local type that we call viewing, which is a single viewing. Okay? So that's just a little hint that helps out the designer to use the picker, and in a moment you'll see that light up. Before we can do that, though, we really need to just write a tiny bit of code. And the code we need to write is an event handler. Okay? And that event handler is for the selection changed event on our list box. So what we're going to say here is this dot details grid dot data context is equal to this dot listbox1 dot selected item. And that's really all the code we need to write. Very simple, very straightforward. Be even more straightforward in Silverlight 3 because you'll just use a binding for this kind of thing. So if we build we should now see that, I did take my changes, there we go. There's the greenness, and actually it hasn't quite hooked up right. But you can see that the master details here is working, so as I move along, the person I select, their details are appearing over here. But they're missing a first name, and we can fix that. If we come over to our text box here, and this is using that hinting that I mentioned, as right now, at design time, it has no idea what we're going to do in that code at runtime. But the good news is it does know about the type. So what we can do is say, okay, here's our type. And we can just pick just the same as we did before from that type that doesn't really exist yet. It's just made a design time instance of it so that we can work against it. That's really good news because now we've fixed up our final piece of the master detail scenario and everything's looking great. Well, it could look a little better. And just for my final piece here, what I'm going to do is just make things look a little better on that list box. It was all right, you know, not bad, but we can certainly do better than that. And imagine for the moment that someone who's got more of a talent in the area of producing visual designs has gone ahead and produced some styles for you. We go ahead and in Visual Studio 2010 we have an experience for finding and applying styles and resources. So we use this little apply resource. You can't really see it here from here, but there's a little tiny paintbrush next to that just to remind you that you're painting on a resource. And we can see here that we've got a couple styles. And what we're going to do is pick out the listbox item style. And wish we hadn't. That would have painted on the style had this not been a very early build, and this was working earlier, I swear. It would have been a beautiful finish to have shown you the wonderful glow effect that would have been applied. Nevertheless, you can see that that's the kind of experience you have. And what you also may have noticed when you were in that window is that we have a search box. So when you have many styles or many brushes, which is really very typical in a very large application, you can actually search for them, you can pick things out, it's no problem. So I'm pretty much out of time, but I do want to cover one final thing, and that is, what about development now in the Silverlight 3 beta? So you can all read the slide, but the good news is there's an update of the Silverlight 3 tools for Visual Studio 2008 if you want to carry on working in that environment. It provides all the things you've been used to when you've been working in Silverlight 2 in the same environment. It also leverages the extra compression that the guys have put into the Zap stuff, so all of that comes in for free. But it still has a preview-only design surface. When the time comes for us to release Visual Studio 2010 Beta 1, which is in a matter of months now, what you'll get is what you've seen today, which is full support for Silverlight 2, and an early form of support for Silverlight 3, so you can start to look at that. Visual Studio 2010 is a multi-targeting release, both for WPF and for Silverlight, so you can target whichever version of the platform you want, and that we hope that you find that that's good news. You'll be able to try that out in both platforms in 2010 Beta 1, and we will, of course, have full Silverlight 3 support by the time we ship. So I want to thank you for your time and attention, and ask if you've got any questions. No questions? Just the one. So the data sources window work. At this point in time, we're working to make sure that that happens. It's not actually certain right now that that will happen, but we're working very hard to make it happen. As you can imagine, it's a very useful feature. It actually rests on the creation of the collection view source in the platform, which is the thing that undergirds all of the work that you saw there in the data sources window. So can't promise that yet, but we definitely hear that it's an important feature, and anyone who really feels that that's terribly important, whether you're watching here in the room or whether you're watching afterwards, feel free to send me email and let me know how much you support that feature, because we really do care about your feedback. But can I take any further questions offline afterwards, because we do have to get out of the room and I don't want to rob my next presenter of his time. So thanks a lot for your attention. I will be at the back, and tweet me if you can't find me now. Cheers.